Hey guys, John here. The question of the day that I've seen posted quite a bit, and I've also been asked quite a bit as well, is which synth should I get? So let's play some nice music and let's get into it. So, which synth should I get? Now, that is a complicated question, especially if you're kind of starting out and then you're looking around there and there's so many synthesizers to pick from. There's free ones, there's paid ones, there's analog. I mean, you can go down a rabbit hole. There's modular, it's just endless. So, how are you supposed to know which one you want to get? Which one's right for you? Which is what do you what do you want to get? So, the first thing I should probably say for that is synthesizers in a way to me are kind of like cars, right? They all drive, they have wheels, they have a steering wheel, and they go from A to B, right? That's kind of like synthesizers. They design sound, they have oscillators, they have filters, they make sound, they help you design sound. That's the whole concept behind it. So that might sound obvious at first, but the more you look into it, you say, okay, every different car, the gas pedal is going to react differently. The brakes are going to be different. The height of the car is going to be different. The wheels are going to feel different on the road. The different types of wheels that you have, the different engines that you have. Some require different fuel, so on and so forth. So the first thing I would probably go with is, what sound do you need? What type of music are you trying to make? Because yes, they can all get you there, but some might get you there a little bit better. Like, sure, you can drive in the snow in the two-wheel drive. You might get there, you might not, but you probably want something a little beefier. So what kind of sound do you want? Do you want something very clean and modern? Do you want something that resembles analog? Do you have a certain artist that you kind of like to emulate, and maybe their music was recorded a long time ago, and you kind of look at what type of synths that they were using, and maybe you kind of want that sound. So instead of using a synthesizer that can get you there but a lot more steps, you might want to use maybe an emulation of what they had or the actual hardware of what they had, and you're going to get a little bit closer that way. So that's kind of one of the reasons. What sound are you looking for? What do you want to make with it? Now, in that sense, it's like, let's say your type of genre relies heavily on wavetable synthesizers, where you really want those cool wavetables in your synthesizer. Not every synth will have wavetable functionality, so it wouldn't make sense to maybe get an analog emulation of something if you're going for a wavetable stuff. So that's kind of another thing to think about as well, as far as like what sound do you want. Also, that sound comes with certain type of features. If you're really getting into FM synthesis, then you're going to obviously want an FM synthesizer. Now, in that sense, you're like, okay, well, which one can you get? There's a lot of different ones. Do you have a budget? Do you not? So that's kind of a thing. If you don't have a budget, you might want to try out Dex. That's a great one for FM, and it's free. So there's that. Now, the other one is, what type of workflow do you need? Do you want a synthesizer that is like an all-purpose kind of thing? Do you want a workhorse synthesizer, or do you just want a couple oscillators, a filter, and maybe some limited modulation? Maybe that's all you need. That's totally fine. Maybe that's the workflow that you want. Maybe there's some synthesizers out there that can do a lot of the same functionality, but they get there in different ways. So like with cars, they all have seats. Maybe you want leather seats. Maybe you want something different. Maybe you want a different type of fabric. Maybe, that's the kind of thing. It's got to kind of fit you in a little bit of a way. What kind of workflow do you want? Maybe you want the most efficient. Maybe you want the most fun. Maybe you want the most graphically good-looking one, or the most optimized CPU-wise. So that's kind of the things you have to think about as well. So what kind of gear do you have? What can you incorporate? And there you go. So that's one thing. If you have a really beefy system and you really want that nice analog sound, maybe Diva can get you there. That might be a thing. And also, what kind of features that you want. And this is kind of as well related to the wavetable thing. Maybe you want a synthesizer that is kind of like a workhorse. You want as many filters as you want. You want 10 oscillators, 8 oscillators, whatever it might be. Maybe you want to mix analog or virtual analog with samples. Maybe you want to mix that with wavetables, or maybe you want to mix that with FM or something like that. Then maybe you need to look for a synthesizer that has that capability to mix and match the different types of synthesis. Maybe you're into additive. Maybe that's kind of the sound you're going for. So maybe you want to look for a synthesizer like that. Now, especially this question comes up when we're kind of looking at stuff like the collection from Arturia. There's a lot of synthesizers in there, and yes, they all can make sound, they can all design what you want them to make, but they get there in certain different ways. There's different interfaces, and they look and sound different. Now, this brings me to the next and potentially the last point of the whole thing. So each synthesizer is broken up to different categories. If you want to look at it that way, they have oscillators, they have filters, they have their different systems of modulation, different modulators, and they also have different effects. So with that being said, maybe there's a synthesizer that you like, but you're not really too sold on how the filter sounds. And the more you get into this whole world, the more you'll realize that sending oscillators through different filters will give you a different sound, different flavor, a different taste. Now, some of them we can see as sounding good, some of them we can see as sounding bad, but that in a sense is very subjective, because what might sound bad to me might sound good to you. So that's something that you're going to have to discover for yourself. Now, as far as the modulation goes, so maybe you want to create sound design stuff where you want a lot of different modulators, ways to make interesting modulation shapes and curves and things like that. Maybe you want to combine a sawtooth oscillator or a LFO with maybe a triangle one and kind of mix and match those, and that's something where pigments could come in handy with a combinate tab and making interesting shapes, or all those different kind of things. Maybe you want to make a custom shape and draw in your own shape of modulation because you have something very specific or a certain rhythm that you want to kind of trigger on something, and that's going to get a little bit more into the complicated side. But as you start to discover, the modulation systems of those synthesizers are very, very important, because that's going to be how you move and shape your sound over time. That's a big thing. Oscillators as well. Not every oscillator and every synthesizer is going to sound the same. And that might sound crazy, but load up some different synthesizers, load up this same default saw wave, and either just listen to it, load it up through a spectrum analyzer, and you're going to notice they sound different. Some are brighter, some are duller, some don't even have signal above 15K, some have signal above 20. So that's another thing as well. What kind of sound that you want. You know, if you have Serum or you have Diva, load up a saw wave and listen to both of those back to back at the same volume, and you're going to notice they do sound different. And a lot of the times, the basic shapes like saw waves, square waves, triangle waves, or even sine waves, those things are your basic ingredients, and not every synthesizer does them the same way. That's what's kind of cool with the analog emulation, is that those different saw waves sounded differently for each different, or they sound different for each different synthesizer back then. So if you combine those basic ingredients that sound a little bit different, your end product, your end sound is also going to be different. It's the same in cooking. You can buy, there's so many different types of salt out there. There's like, right, there's the pink salt, there's blue salt, there's black salt, there's table salt, there's all different kinds. And they're salt and they taste like salt, but there's slightly different characteristics or slightly different flavors and feelings of those. So that's kind of very similar with sound design, and it's a lot like cooking as well. You can get tomatoes from all over the world and they're not going to taste the exact same. So that's why picking maybe a specific tomato with a specific type of salt is going to get you a different type of recipe. Even though it's the same ingredients, it's going to taste different because they're different ingredients, if that makes any sort of sense. So that's kind of the main concept. So as a recap, right, which one do you want? What sound are you going for? That's what I think probably first have to establish. If you're going into like retro wave stuff, then yeah, you can get there with just about any synth, but it might be easier and you might have a better time going with something more geared toward that type of style. That's something to think about. Now, what kind of workflow do you need? Every synthesizer out there will speak differently to a different person. Some people say, I love this workflow. This makes me feel so creative and it's so fluid and easy, and that's a huge part of it. It's not just how it sounds, it's also the workflow of that. Because if we have a synthesizer that sounds amazing, but man, it's a pain to use and it's a struggle and you can't really see what's going on and it's just set up not really well, in our opinion, then we might probably go to a synthesizer that looks and feels better to use, that might have a slightly less appealing sound. So interface is a huge deal of that as well. And then also the features. What kind of stuff do you want in it? Do you want some crazy effects that are specific to that synth? Maybe you want that, or maybe you want some crazy type of synthesis. Maybe you want to have a FM oscillator and have that FM wavetable oscillator. That might be a thing as well. So that's kind of a thing you want to go for. And the oscillators, filters, modulation, and effects are all going to be slightly different in every synthesizer. So kind of look around, see which ones that kind of fit you as well. And the last kind of categories that I kind of want to go over, there's a couple different categories of synthesizers in general, not just like the features that they have, but the stuff that you can do with them. So We have some analog emulation stuff, and those are fantastic. They sound great. If that's a sound that you want to go for, absolutely. And then on the other spectrum, we have synthesizers that are very capable of doing so many things, where each key on the keyboard can trigger a different sound. It can do a different thing, and we can maybe we can sample maybe a piano or an instrument, and then all those recordings, we can bring that into a synthesizer and play that as if we were playing the actual instrument. So we can go that deep and basically make a synthesizer workstation. Or you can go into the entire different category of modular synthesis with VCV rack, Cardinal, whatever it is you want to do, and kind of just build everything from there, or the Bitwig grid, where you can just really design what you want to. Now that gets into the more complicated stuff, so it's not going anywhere. Don't feel like you need to rush to get in there, but it is a good way to learn sound design. That's one thing I found as well, is if you spend some time in VCV or any type of modular type of environment, everything is not set up for you, so you have to do that yourself. And then once you kind of get past this hurdle of this is so complicated, what connects here, what's a gate, how does this all work, then you come back to your software synthesizers that are basically kind of already set up for you. There's already oscillators there, they're already routed to the filter, that's already done for you. We kind of take that for granted. So when you come back to those, it becomes unfathomably easy to use those. So that's kind of a little tidbit there. And also demo the synthesizer that you want. There's been synths out there that I thought this was going to be the coolest one, and I used it for a little while. I'm like, it's okay. It's not really blowing my socks off. It sounds good. It feels okay, but it just wasn't it for me. And that's probably the very last thing. Maybe pick a synthesizer that you feel good in, because some people will hype some of them up, and that might be for good reason, but it might also not really be the right one for you. Like I mentioned before, Serum is a great synthesizer. I don't really use it. It's not really my favorite synthesizer out there. I hardly ever use it, but that doesn't mean it's not good or it's not capable. Of course it is. But it just has to speak to you in a certain type of way that you're going to like to use. A lot of people love Falcon for the complexity of it all. Some people just say, what is this thing? I don't even understand how this works. So again, the interface, the sound, everything, it has to also speak to you. So that's kind of more of a I get maybe philosophical approach. I don't know, but hopefully that's kind of answers that question a little bit. If you have any more advice on that for anybody else who's thinking about this question, please drop it below. I'd love to hear your perspective on it. And yeah, thanks for watching.